So welcome back. I want to just point out that we stopped pretty much, I wouldn't say abruptly, but before the real flow of the message of this, which he began in Perek Beis. I wasn't feeling that well a bit last week, so the beginning of Beis. We're going to do a little recap, and not much though, because on the overall, of course, the message of this Perek, explaining this pasuk in Yeshaya, V'haya Maisa Hatzdaka Shalom, the action of tzedakah would be bring peace. The service of tzedakah would bring tranquility and security forever. End quote of the pasuk, for eternity. And of course, we ask the difference. Maisa tzedakah, avodas tzedakah seems to be quite similar. Of course, not in its language, but in its implication. So why would one bring peace and the other would bring hashkit vavetach, security and certainty for eternity? That was the beginning, the opening of this very chapter, letter that is, epistle, Yud Beis, the 12th. We gave the Alter begins explaining the difference between the two services, if you will, or to be exact, one, the action of tzedakah and the service of tzedakah, and the result that it brings. And he gives this introduction between the Michal Sar Shel Mayim, Gabriel Sar Shel Eish, explaining the verse, Eisa Shalom Bimreimav, Hashem makes peace on high. And of course we ask the question, where is there any conflict on high? Where is there any quarrel on high that Hashem has to bring peace? That's the whole point of the on high, that it's superior. It doesn't have the issues that we have below, which yes, it's a world of divisiveness in so many different ways, but it of course expresses itself in arguments, quarrels, in so many different levels, global and all the way to the specific individual, rather, let's say not getting along, or even certain differences between, if it's communities or individuals, and it ends up being something which perhaps there's lacking peace, to say it on the more positive expression of matters, lacking peace, and somebody comes as a mediator, as an example, and makes peace between the two parties. That makes sense. This is all in our world. It's an inferior world. This is what we're acquainted with, the imperfect world, which of course the Yid has the mandate to make it perfect, and even in this area, the whole entire Torah was not lasis shalom ba'olam. We are able to navigate through Torah and understand and appreciate its ultimate message is to bring peace on all different levels: individual peace, community peace, societal. In other words, there is societal argument to bring peace there, and to bring peace to an entire world. The world should feel the peace, the harmony, and in the end of the day, the entire world appreciating the master plan of the creation itself, of the world itself, ultimately submissive, a pleasant, harmonious submission to a creator, to the way Hashem had the Almighty, what Hashem, the Almighty, had in plan for creation. That's the ultimate goal. That's the energy of Torah. In the end of the day, to take an imperfect world, a divided world, and to bring unity and harmony. This is the world we live in, the inferior Olam Hazeh, but on high, Bimreimav, that's what makes it on high. There's perfection. Besides the fact, everything is on a very spiritual, godly. The standard default ambiance on high, and what makes it, establishes the on high, is the fact that it's a godly world and a godly domain. So why is there quarrel, and why does Hashem have to make shalom, bring peace, b'imreimav on high? That was the question, and the Alter goes in to the Michal Sar Shel Chesed, Gabriel Sar Shel Gvura. We're going to repeat just a little more and to get into the flow over here. We just, as usual, we point out we are learning to get us HaKadosh. This is a very distinct segment, distinct than the previous segments. We did mention the Tanya has 5 segments. We merited to conclude everything up till here, which means the entire Likutei Amarim, Sharich V'Emunah, Yigeres HaTshuva, and Yigeres HaKodesh We concluded the week before the 11th, and now we entered into the 12th. Igeres HaKodesh. Last week we entered into the 12th. You can, wherever you're watching it, and you could see it, we do mention there is an advantage of the original website, tanyaonline.com, one word, tanyaonline.com. And the advantage is also that you have access, namely, because you have access to all the previous classes, even last week's class, to understand even today's class. We're going to try to recap a bit to make it a little more smooth, but nonetheless, it has the the basis of what Yud Beis is all about. It's a click away, but from there, also all the way down on the left side of the screen, one could find every single class of this entire setup over here, of the study of Tanya, all the way back to the very beginning of Likutei Amorim, first segment. And it comes up in the same and similar fashion. There's a separate screen, a separate scroll bar or it's presented with a separate scroll bar for the text, as such easy to follow. As we do periodically mention, we did note that we had a little more of a detailed presentation of what the Igeres HaKodesh, the backdrop of Igeres HaKodesh, is in the beginning, the first class of the 10th epistle, just two over. There was quite a few classes on the 10th, but the very first. We periodically do mention it, but we gave a little more in a time to that presentation of what Igeres HaKodesh is all about. Again, we did mention it's very distinct. It's not sequential like the other segments. These are letters written at certain times to certain communities, even though they become part of the Torah of the Alter Rebbe, especially it makes its way into the Tanya Kadisha, of course, the eternal message of Torah for posterity. Again, the beginning of Igeres, the 10th chapter, a little backdrop. So where we're holding in the text over here, Kuf Yud Zayin Yud Beis, that is, which begins in the center of the page, where we're holding a HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shalom B'Neim. So basically, the Alter Rebbe is saying there, and we shouldn't do much because we give some time to explain that there's the Michael and Gabriel, the two ministers on high, one representing Chesed and one representing Gevura, to give and to discipline. Again, we're really not going to recap everything in detail. One, to follow, to understand. Again, if you're following, wherever you're following, you understand what the message is till Ach. But if you want to get a little bit, if you're following this class, and today's class is not a substitute for the previous class, it's a click away, and definitely we went into it in a very detailed manner, that the two camps, Michal, and again led by Michal, the minister, the angel, which is about advocating for Am Yisrael individually or by community or all of Am Yisrael, and then there's Gabriel, which is about discipline, and that's a healthy way in every state of one giving. If it's a parental extension or a pedagogue, in pedagogy you always have to have, I'm here to give, but there always ought to be the idea of discipline in order to have the best result, the best production, and so on. So, yet in the same token, there could be, even on high, one way or another, somewhat of a, each one, because they're doing, as we underscore this idea, because they're doing this job so perfectly without any bias. So that's where perhaps there would be something which, like, what is underscored? It's the chesed or the gvura. It's the giving or the discipline. And we say that's only when they stand as a separate entity. But we gave the example, two ministers, they're perfectly doing their job. Even we gave an example, the spending and the oversight over the spending as an example. They're both needed. Of course, the spending is the message, the objective, that is, and the goal is to spend, to give, to establish these different programs which allow if it's a country, even in democracy or in the way it was in the years, the idea of the king subject or the king leading and so on and so forth. There are the ministers were there to provide, and then there's the oversight, the discipline, this disciplinarian, which overlook this of those who give. And again, they're equally important as in any relationship or any connection between giver and receiver, provider and recipient. If it's, again, on a level of an intellect or, again, a parental relationship in that manner, in that context of the parent giving, providing, and then there's the notion of discipline from the same parent. usually. But even in the say that we said in the same pedagogue, there is a giving, but then there's a discipline dimension of that same individual, that same teacher. As an example, what is the objective? Of course, the objective is to give, not for this, to discipline. But nonetheless, when two are doing their job so perfectly, sometimes there could be friction. Again, you got to see the previous class. And the point is, when they both are summoned into the chamber of the king, that sends perspective instantaneously into both of them, that when they walk out, they adjust anything has to be adjusted, that there should be that harmony, that working in harmony thereafter. And sometimes they get so caught up, they have to go back into the chamber of the king for the private audience, for how long it would take to them to come into with their senses that we are here for a higher purpose. We're not here just to perfect our job, which then, because you're perfecting your job, and your job itself somewhat seems to contradict, and perhaps does contradict, the other objective and the goal, rather, of the other party, the other minister, in this case, especially when they're diametrically opposite and oppose one each other. The giving, in this case on high, the Ches Gavri Michal, the advocate for Am Yisrael, extending, allowing the on high to extend the Chesed and come down or rush down all the way till this very plane. Like we said, the whole point that it comes through even Begashmis, see the previous class. And Gabriel, the idea of the discipline, always coming in and saying maybe not so fast, and maybe not so much, whatever the reason, but that's how it's established on high. So when they're both doing their job so perfectly, of course there could be the notion of clash one way or another. I mean, we're not talking about clash the way we appreciate clash, but the idea is that two forces are coming too strong, and perhaps there could be a contradiction, or could be a certain sense of friction between them, and then they both come into the chamber of the king, and they automatically, instantaneously adjust in their own mind, in their own consciousness, and perhaps in their subconscious structure, in the sub or subconscious bracket, when they walk out, they realize, we're here to serve the purpose. And when they're standing in the domain of the king, they're so overwhelmed by the king itself, and therefore there's an immediate adjustment that we're here to serve a higher purpose, a hierarchy, and therefore, of course, we're going to both do the best of our ability, and yes, perfecting ourselves with our objective, our goal, our job, our mandate, but nonetheless, not only is not going to be friction, there's always going to be the complementing one each other, because we're here to serve the higher purpose. We're here to serve the king. And again, periodically, it's only normal. They need a reminder. And that's why the reason, and it's only normal in every system, that they're always called into the higher offices. There are those in the yesteryears when it was set up, the king leadership, as an example, they're called into the king. They're standing in front of the audience of the king on its own, before even the king has to say something. Just they feel the radiance, the aura of the king, and the radiance of the king that establishes the adjustment. And they walk out again so distinct in comparison to the way they went in. There's nothing malicious, especially maliciously done, contrary to the other party. You're talking about angels, celestial, godly angels. But nonetheless, they have a mandate, and they take their mandate very serious, and they're meant to take their mandate very serious because they're angels, because they're godly representatives of the system Hashem established. So of course they do their very job, and as such, chesed, or a little gvura, or too much gvura, or maybe too much chesed, and therefore, there could be somewhat that non-harmonious, so to say, working together. In the end of the day, two ministers of this very establishment. Ultimately, the king. And for that reason, they have to periodically visit the chamber of the king to really feel the overwhelming presence of the king, in order that they should be able to, in the end of the day, work in harmony. So, when one would ask the question, when they walk out of the chamber of the king, what is underscored? Underscored is the work of the disciplinarian, which is the minister of Gvura, or the minister of Chesed. The answer is, of course, the latter, because what is the king's objective? The king's objective when he establishes this whole system is to give, to provide. Especially you're talking about when we say a king as an example, we're not talking about anybody which is, there's generally, and especially in the yesteryears with kings, when power could reach someone's head somewhat too deep, and they could even start off, with well intentions, but at the end of the day, as proven in the years in the past, that it begins with much well intentioned, but not intentioned, the king, and nonetheless, in the end of the day, when the power hits a little bit in the wrong direction, or that they hitting the conscious mind of the king, whoa, I'm in power, there begins a system, even a system of corruption. And unfortunately, it could end up in very ugly ways, that it was proven in the past. But you're talking even a proper king, which is able to understand from beginning to the end. And there was proper kings in our history, not only in the Jewish world, but in the world in general. And he was able to stay focused, and he was there for the people, not the other way around. But at the end of the day, he was a monarch, he was a king, and he deserved that complete honor and submission of the people to him, understandably so. But in the end of the day, he understood and appreciated the fact he was for the people. So ultimately, it's about the giving. When they both walk out, they realize it's about the chesed, it's about the extension of the kindness coming from this monarchy. That is the objective, that is the goal. The disciplinarian is just to keep a certain balance, that the result should be a positive result. Like you're talking about a parent, they're there to give, but if you give too much, the kid becomes spoiled, and the result will be not so good, to say the least. So of course there has to be the discipline, but this discipline is just there to touch up, to make sure that the kabbalas hashpa, the receiving of this which is provided, if it's again parental, or if it's the pedagogue in any way, or if, as we gave the example, someone leading a country, to give to the people, they should be able to be happy, content, and established, and so on. So that is the objective. So when they go into the king, what do they come out? What do they sense? Of course, the overriding of the chesed over the gvura. What is put in perspective is that the gvura is just to establish that the kindness, the extension of kindness, should end up in a very proper way and then have the best results, not the other way around. So as long as they're not around the king, of course, it could be somewhat, that's the point of the friction, because the gvura, the minister of gvura, again, you got to see in the last week's class, when we talking about Gabriel, why is he is the minister of fire, that's what he speaks about, fire and water, and they do not extinguish one each other, because Hashem comes in between them, among them, that is. But in the previous class we explained why Gvura is associated with fire. But again, you have to see the previous class to understand the details when we speak about the angel and Michael and his camps, and Gvura, Gabriel representing the other side, Gvura and his camps, and what is their objective, what is their goal. So as long as they're not in the face of the king, as an example, when you're talking about two physical ministers, yeah, they're both doing their job perfectly, especially they're people of honesty, integrity, ministers of honesty and integrity. But because the Gvura has that mandate, somewhat it can clash, and somewhat it could hold back the deserving chesed, deserving kindness, and expression of amicability to the people, which is meant to be extended to them through the system, through the minister of chesed. But this is, in the end of the day, the objective and goal of the king and of the system, to give, to provide. Gabriel is just there to keep a certain balance. But sometimes when they don't stand in front of the king, somewhat they can get lost in their own positions, and Gabriel somewhat could come in a little too strong. And sometimes it works with the same person. Of course, I have to discipline. This has to be periodic introspection. Am I disciplining a little too much? And that too much is perhaps preventing the system to work. The system that I am trying to establish. The system that I established in the very beginning when I took the position. And again, if it's a teacher or somebody who's governing a given to in their jurisdiction a certain area to govern, and again, if it's the king or if it's even the parent, there always has to be the reflection and introspection. to see if it's really working, even as an individual, especially when it comes to two people, two ministers. They're doing the job so perfect, so it could be something which it could end up to be something which the result is not that good. So they have to go into the chamber of the king, appreciate the ambiance of the king, and that itself instinctively, they feel the idea of what the objective and goal is coming from the king's position, and of course it's to extend kindness and amicability and whatever the nation needs in order to live with contentment and joy and even in deep pleasantness. That's the objective. So they go into the king, it's the aura of the king, the presence of the king, the radiation of the king makes all that difference. And they walk out and they realize, whoa, everybody adjusts and realigns and reconfigurates their positions, and it works out well. And again, they both complement each other, and everybody is happy. Not only from the king's position, the people, they're getting what they need, and they're getting it in a proper manner, and it really contributes to their stability, their establishments, their bringing up their families in the areas, cities, provinces, which they live under this, to the tutelage of this establishment of this king, run by the ministers of the king, as an example, because it works out just perfect that everybody's really happy because they're receiving more and they're receiving pleasantly. The program, so to say, the way it's passed on from the higher offices, if you will, to the people is flawless, and in the end of the day, they appreciate it. They appreciate it deeply, and they live a very pleasant, happy, content life. And again, when there's friction between these two ministers, it doesn't always work out that way. That's why periodically you have to enter into the chamber of the king, as an example, again, to have the realignment, the readjustment. So the Alter Rebbe says over here, this is the idea of that when they stand in front of the Hashem himself, what happens is, in the end of the day, what happens, that's the perfect alignment. What happens again instantaneously, and of course what overrides is the chesed over the gvura. That is understandably what overrides, because they're in the presence of Hashem, and Hashem is teva hatei b'lehetiv. The core of Hashem is all about giving good. That's what Hashem created this world. It says in Kabbalah, they basically chafetz chesed hu. In the very beginning, there was not even this system of reciprocity. You'll do and I will give, and then usually the giving is commensurate to this which you will do. No, Hashem began. There was no one, of course, to arouse Hashem's kindness in the very beginning of creation, or emanation, or even beyond that. It's all about Hashem's inner chesed, meaning to say core, essential energy, which is beyond any limitation, beyond any description of chesed. It's the core chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We began the whole program, if you will. And that's why it's called chafetz, which means the inner workings of Hashem is all about chesed. And when they stand in front of the king, the Melech Malchem Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the chesed of HaKadosh, when he said, I'll try to use the lashon. This is there always is, and it was Alter Rebbe saying that at all times, of course, they're the ambience of Hashem. They're ministers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, especially on high. The on high, it's all a divine ambience which establishes, and this is the reason why it's considered on high. It's not a second story, a third story, or a 100th story, which makes it on high. The reason why it's called on high, b'mereimav, it's because they're always in the presence of the divine. But nonetheless, they represent a certain limited energy of on high. This one has associated with the midah chesed of Hashem, and the other one midah gvura. When you say Hashem comes in, it's an opening of the infinite kindness of HaKadosh, infinite presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is about the window to the infinity, the true pshitas, the true infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And on a core essential levels, the deeper you get within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's of course about the kindness. Ki chafetz chesed, Hashem is teva hatei b'lehetiv. The inherent nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to give, is to be kind. And when that window opens up, it's not only because Hashem's, says, okay, let me overwhelm a little bit or give another dosage of chesed to the side of chesed. No, it's just the presence of Hashem, which Hashem is the teva hatei b'lehetiv, meaning to say this is the program Hashem began because of his deepest types of chesed. And when that comes in, which is again similar, analogous to the king. The king, you're talking about a proper king. It's about his giving, not about holding back. The king is not about discipline. Of course, he has to establish, so to say, a system of discipline. Understandably so, because that's the only way it works. But what's the king all about? The king is to provide, and to give, and to make his people, each one of them, individually happy and content. And the fact that they're living under his tutelage, under his government, that's his objective. Again, of course, if he's only a proper king. And if he is, that's his only objective. And he understands that's what his not only main mandate is, this is who he is all about. This is why he took the position, to provide for the people. Together with that, he has to establish the idea of Gevura, for the reason again that it should work well, and so too on I. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes in, what happens is, of course, the Eibishter Hashem is Teva Tev L'Heitiv. And when Hashem, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the window to the infinite opens up, these two ministers, there's immediate, instantaneous realignment between the two. But what overwhelms is the chesed over the gvura. Understandably so. And for that matter, the Alter Rebbe says this is the dimension of Tiferes. Now, when we say Tiferes, it's usually a midah, another midah following chesed and gvura. So really, if Tiferes is a midah, midah also means measurement, which is again very, very much in a line which we said before of the chesed of Malach Bechol. Despite it's a chesed associated with the midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the point why again we said it's on high, it's a divine world with divine energy. And again, chesed is Hashem's midah, the attribute of Hashem, but nonetheless there's a midah, there's a measurement, it's in a measured format, and so too it comes to Gvura. So apparently Tiferes is also a midah. Comes out to them and says, no, Tiferes is really considered a midah, but it's connected all the way to the Ein Sof, to the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when that opens up, that window opens up, it's virtually the window of Tiferes. And because Tiferes really is connected all the way on high to the Ein Sof, despite being a midah, and it's explained in so many areas of Kabbalah and Chassidus, you can see it very clearly. There's a Maimer, a relatively short discourse of the Alter Rebbe himself, in another work of the Alter Rebbe known as Torah Eir on the Parsha Shavua. It's Parsha's Boy. The Alter Rebbe explains that the Tiferes is a midah, but nonetheless it's about the Ein Sof, the infinite energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why Tiferes also is a combination of both. That's the idea of beauty. Tiferes translated as beauty, because the idea of chesed is about, it's one color, if you will, about giving. Gvura is another color, again, if you will, it's about discipline, taking back or discipline. Beauty is usually when you have a combination of two colors. And that's what Tiferes is all about. But how could you combine two colors if they're so starkly opposite one each other? He says that's where Tiferes represents something which is beyond color. The infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, it's Pashut B'tachas Apshitus. There's no definition to the Ein Sof, to the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why it's perfectly connects, or Tiferes connects with it, because that's what Tiferes is. It's able to bring the two extreme opposite, diametrically opposite energies together. And that's what establishes Tiferes' beauty, because it is a combination of both. And how could it combine both? Because it's connected to the Ein Sof. So when you say that Hashem comes into the presence, in other words, in the face of the two Chesed and Gvura, it's the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in the end of the day, that is the revelation, that is the expression, the manifestation, the presentation of Tiferes. And when you have that Tiferes, which is connected to the Ein Sof, what overrides is understandably the Chesed over the Gvura, similar to the examples that we gave. And for that matter, again, it's the immediate result of healthy introspection of a pedagogue or a parent, that in the end of the day, I'm here to give. And the discipline is just to make sure that it ends up well and the results are positive. That's it. And not to get carried away too much with the discipline. That's what the immediate result, usually, of a healthy reflection and introspection. But in this case, it's not an introspection of the two ministers. It's standing in front of the king. Hashem coming between them. So let's go on with the text. Hashem makes peace between them. Through a revelation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals in them a great extension of himself, an enormous energy, very much. Remember, we mentioned many times, and it says Netera, Ma'id, and it says Tanya, Ma'id, associated with Ma'idcha, which means when you want to express something which is very deep and grand, and again, at all levels, quantitatively and qualitatively, it's to the Ma'id, and here you have a few Lashonis, a few expressions. Hashba Atzuma, Ma'id, an intense and very much energy, extended from Ma'id and Sabaruchu, from the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Try to define what level we're talking about. Try to define what type of energy. Yeah, Oir Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the light of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He. So you're talking about infinity, so you don't need to further look for any description. For that matter, this is what the infinite is all about, is beyond description. It's not, there's no measurement to it. It transcends any type of limitation, even from the level of Chabad, which is Mokir Hamidis, as we know, these 10 Tiferes. It begins Chochma Bina Das, and it's explained so many places. A quick reference, Perek of reference would be Perek Gimel, many times in Tanya, but pretty much the first. It's Perek Gimel in Likutei Amorim. In the first segment, it's a click away. The third chapter, the Alter Rebbe begins, speaks about the 10 Tiferes. And it begins, the very beginning of the chapter, it begins, Chochma Bina Das, usually produce midos, and again, doesn't only work with the godly soul, which Alter Rebbe is talking about there, coming from the Perek Beis, which begins with Nefesh Hasheni, is B'Yisrael, Yechelik, Edekami, Mal Mamash. The Nefesh of a Yid is a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Alter Rebbe continues in the third chapter that this Neshama, which is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is similar to Hashem himself. There's 10 Tiferes. And he begins and he explains Chacham Bina Das usually produce a midah, and it works in all areas. Even though again there he's focusing on the godly soul, but in every single area. In other words, even when you're talking about the nefesh hasichlis, nefesh hadvis, what you understand, what you appreciate, that's what you gravitate to. If it's a program you're trying to figure out and you understand it and you study it thoroughly, in your mind you see the benefit of it, it immediately triggers a midah, a gravitation to it. We call it ava if it's love, but not always use the word love. It's usually to another party, but sometimes someone loves what they're doing. But the idea you gravitate to something or to somebody. Then there's gvura. It arouses a certain fear. You're reading something, you're learning something, and your mind appreciates something which is perhaps not so comfortable, so establishes somewhat, let me stay away from it. Sometimes there is a certain appreciation of another party that arouses a reverence of the other party. It's not about so much awe or fear, but usually sometimes goes together, but it's more revering the other party. This is how it usually works. Chabad is Makar Lamid, this intellect is a source of the attribute, the expression of attributes, or the birth of attribute, the production of attribute. You can see it in that Perek. It's very, very explicitly explained there. So Chabad is, of course, even higher than the Midas, right? Chach Mina Das, and then Chesed Gvura Tiferes, and so on the other Midas. But he says this Tiferes is rooted all the way to the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore it's higher than the Chach Mina Das, which is the source of the Midas. And what happens then? When you have that revelation, Ozaya, Midas Negdi, Hashem Michael, then you have the opposing Midas characters of Michael and Gabriel. Nichlolos b'mkoyim b'sharsha, they become subsumed in their source and in their root. They become truly one with their source, similar to the two ministers walking into the chamber of the king. Usually out of the chamber of the king, and especially when they're in their position, in their offices, executing their mandate, they're in full sense of expression and doing, and the way it is on this plane and on high. Michal and Gabriel are very busy and very actively busy, but when they come in front of the king, of course at that time, usually, especially when you're talking about them appreciating the divine, especially them appreciating the Eid and Sup, but it works in all levels. When you come into the king, sometimes you can't even say a word, because at that point it's about a complete consumption or subsumption into the aura, into the radiance of the king. You're in the king's chamber. You usually stand with an ultimate expression of selflessness, self-nullification, a total submission to the presence of the area and the chamber that you're standing in the presence of the king. And so too when Gabriel and Michael, Hashem opens that window of the Ein Sof, at that point, it's not only they're not in a state of expression, but they become completely one. And they completely stand in complete nullification in the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He, which shines to them in a revealed manner. And then as a result, mismazgim or mismaskim hagvuris b'chasadim, that there's that synthesis, or more so that the combination. And ultimately, when we say combination, what namely combines into what reigns supreme, what has more overriding. So what is more overriding over the other? Of course, the gvuris in the chesed. The discipline becomes small and understand it's just an addendum to the chesed, because the ultimate objective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to give. And that is why Tiferes is such a unique midah. It's able to combine, but not just to combine that they each one remain in their previous status with a sense of bittul, sense of nullification to an eye, but no, it establishes such perspective that there is the mismaskim, the sweetening of gvurais into chesed, and what overrides in the end of the day of chesed. And the end of the day is the chesed of Hashem's kindness. Through that center here, the Alter Rebbe introduces the idea of Tiferes, that center midah, which is the kav hamachriya, umata klapi chesed, what weighs down, what is given more priority and emphasis, is the chesed, the kindness, because in the end of the day, this is what the Ein Sof is all about. So when they stand in front of the Ein Sof, Hashem opens the window to the Ein Sof. The midah of Tiferes comes to expression. So what happens is it's immediately machriya, it weighs down and is bent towards chesed. What overrides is chesed. And that's why Tiferes is midas harachamim and yikram Hashem Tiferes. Mercy is also aligned with Tiferes in the words of the wise of truth. The simple idea, we mentioned it so many times, you find it in many places in the previous segments and up to here where we learned, but very briefly, this is the point of Rachmanis. You have it also later in Yud Zayin. We didn't learn it yet, it's not a click away in this program, but of course you could find it anywhere. Yud Zayin in Igeres HaKodesh, the 17th in Igeres HaKodesh, explains it in the very beginning, the very first page of that chapter, that this is the whole point of mercy. Kindness is not mercy, and mercy is not kindness. Kindness is all about giving. There's no, in the area of chesed itself, there's no even room for discipline. It's all about giving. Remember what Avraham Avinu said? Lu yishmal yichil lefanecha. But Yishmael is Yishmael, it doesn't matter. It's just about let him be, because Avraham is all about kindness. He doesn't even see anything faulty, even in Yishmael. Well, to make a mistake, Yishmael was a loyal servant to Avraham in the very beginning of his, how to say, as he brought up, eventually he took a turn to, as the Pasuk it says, V'yepera Adam, Yodei Bakoil V'yad Koil Bay, right? But nonetheless, Avraham Avinu felt, oh, it's my son, let Yishmael be my successor. Really? Yishmael? We know who Yishmael is. Like I say, in a very young age, he started veering to being that troublemaker, if you will. To sum up that pasuk, Pera Adam Yad Bakel V'Yad Kel Bay, as Rashi explained, the Gemara dissects that pasuk. So how could Yishmael be your extension? But that's what Avraham Avinu. It's all about kindness. Chesed doesn't see any room for discipline. Gvura, conversely, is all about discipline. No, you can't. We're not going to give, and it's about holding back, as we again explained in the previous class. What does Rachmanis say? Rachmanis say, yeah, I recognize the reason why not to give, why to hold back, but let's have compassion, let's have pity, and give anyways. If you see it, you say give anyways. That does not exist in the midah of chesed. There's no anyway in the midah of chesed, because chesed is all about kindness, all about giving. It doesn't even see room for holding back. When you say compassion and pity, mercy, therein lies the combination of chesed and gvura. Really, I see much room for holding back and much room for discipline. We'll have mercy and extend anyways. Right there, you have a perfect combination between chesed and gvura, and there is Tiferes. That's why Tiferes is synonymous with Rachmanis, because it's a combination of two colors, Leivin ve'edim, white and red, which is usually Ramzim l'chesed gvura. It's known, of course, the white would be chesed and the red would be gvura. And therefore, because Tiferes is connected, and again, the ability to be able to combine two diametrically opposite characters is just because it has a potent infinite energy which is able to combine the two, and therefore when you say Tiferes, is Shem Hashem, which is referring to the divine name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, about and all about the expression of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu throughout the entire Torah. It refers to Tiferes, like it says in Zayah, Shekan. This is what Tiferes is, here and now. Is Gilui Eidin Sof Baruch Hu, Ha'ora Rabba, the revelation of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with a great extension, with greater intensity, Mishar Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and all the other attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, you can see that very mimer in Torah Eir, easy to access, probably online as well, Shabbos Pashas Bay. This is more than any other midah, because this is associated with the Ein Sof. It's the revelation of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when you have the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the presence, or when Michael, which is the minister of Chesed, and Gabriel, the minister of Gvura, stand in the presence of the infinitely of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whoa, there's immediate adjustment and instantaneous adjustment in a way that, as he says over here, an immediate overriding Chesed over Gvura, because that's what the Ein Sof is all about. The infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is about to give, it's about to extend itself, especially as it says in other places, Chafetz Chesed, or the inner core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is about Chesed, about kindness. Teva Tevleitiv, the very nature, inherent nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Laheitiv, is to give. And again, even similar to the example we gave, it's about giving, providing, and the Gvura is just there to make sure that the receiving of this hashpah should be in a proper manner, and the results should be the best results, and that's the whole point of any type of discipline, as we can all appreciate on every single level. But what overrides is, of course, chesed, and that's what the midah of Tiferes is all about. In order to introduce, in order to establish, in the end of the day, that it's about the Ein Sof, which it's aligned with the manifestation of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which establishes this hismaskus, the sweetening of gvuras, bachasadim. What overrides is chesed. And in the end of the day, as you can imagine, the chesed is not only the previous chesed, which was expressed through the midah chesed, through the malach nechal, because it's overridden from the Ein Sof. It's like you have a little cup of water, which is pouring water, and then you have the other side coming through, or a pipe which is pouring water, and a nice amount coming down without interruption. But nonetheless, when you have a whole gush of water coming through the other side of the pipe, that same water which is coming down in a proportionate manner comes rushing within in comparison, of course, a disproportionate manner. And then when you have the Ein Sof and you have a chesed overriding the gvura over here, so you don't have the previous chesed, you have so much more, because as he says, this is the revelation of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We'll stop over here. I just want to say that it's interesting. Kan, we ask Hashem, Kan, here and now, shall be the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's an interesting expression of the Alter Rebbe. And of course, in context, we understand what it means. But if we may end off the class over here, Kan, shall it be here and now, revelation of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, may be the greatest brachas for all of Am Yisrael, individually and collectively. Have a wonderful night.